All right, so we're going to solve x squared plus 8x plus 6 equals to 0 by completing the square. All right, so let's get to it. We want our constant term by itself on one side, meaning we're going to move over the positive 6 by subtracting 6 to both sides. And we have x squared plus 8x. Let's leave us some space here because we want to make this left-hand side a perfect square trinomial equals to negative 6. So next, let's complete the square by taking half of the coefficient of the middle term, then squaring it. So take half of 8, square it. We have 4 squared, which gives us 16. So we're adding 16 to each side. What you do to the left, you have to do to the right. So next, on the left-hand side, we have a perfect square trinomial, and we're going to write it as a binomial squared. So we have x plus 4 squared equals to negative 6 plus 16, which gives us 10. And then to solve for x, we're going to use the square root property. Let's take the square root to both sides. Left-hand side, the exponent of 2 and the square root cancels out. We have x plus 4 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 10. Taking the square root of 10, we have factors of 1 and 10, 2 and 5. There are no perfect square factors, so the 10 will stay under the radical sign. But lastly, we want to solve for x, so we're going to subtract 4 to both sides, and we have x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 10. And that is our solution. Our next example, we have x squared minus x minus 1 equals to 0. We want our constant term by itself on one side, so we're going to add 1 to both sides. And on the left-hand side, we have x squared minus x. And then we're going to fill in the missing part to make make it a perfect square trinomial equals to, on the right-hand side, 1. So we want to take half of the middle term, what is the middle term for x? What is the coefficient of that? This is a 1. So if we take half of that, okay, we would get what, 0.4, okay, and then square it, oh, excuse me, 0.25, excuse me, not 4, 0.25, and then square it. So take half, square it. This would give us 1/4. So we're going to add 1/4 to both sides. So just because it's a fraction doesn't mean we cannot simplify this out. Okay, so left-hand side, we want to write the left-hand side as a perfect square trinomial. So this becomes x minus 1 over 2 squared equals to, now let's add 1 and 1/4. So 1 plus 1 divided by 4 is 1.25. I want to make this into a fraction. We're going to leave it in fraction form. So I'm going to have my calculator convert this decimal to a fraction. I press the math button, and then under the math heading, you see number 1. You're telling the calculator to convert that answer, your last answer, to a fraction. So you can press 1 or you can press enter. So it's 5/4. 1.25 is equivalency as a fraction is 5/4. Okay, so next, to solve for x, we're going to take the square root to both sides. On the left hand side, the exponent of 2 and the square root cancels out, so we have x minus 1/2 equals 2. Let's look at this square root of 5 over square root of 4. So I can write the square root of 5 over 4. I can write it as two separate radicals, the square root of 5 over the square root of 4. Notice that this 4 is the perfect square that's in the denominator. So take the square root of 4, that's 2, and the square root of 5 is going to stay in the, excuse me, it's going to stay in the numerator as a radical. Okay, so this would be the square root of 5 over 2, but remember we have two solutions, plus or minus. And then solving for x, we're going to add 1/2 to both sides, and we have x is equal to 1/2 plus or minus the square root of 5 all over 2. And there we go. That is our solution.